Welcome to another edition of Miami Herald's Dolphins In Depth podcast. I'm your host, Miami Dolphins columnist Omar Kelly, and joining me to talk about today's Dolphins land pontificating on such things as Tua and Brian Flores' relationship is Barry Jackson. Barry, how are you doing on this fine day?
It was a sad day because it's the last time we're going to be able to watch a full practice until next May. So that play-by-play that all of our readers were used to.
We get one more day.
Bye-bye after tomorrow.
One more day, Barry. Tampa.
One more day in Tampa tomorrow. You'll be there with Isaiah Smalls tomorrow and have full coverage. But this was basically it. Teams are required to allow reporters to be at practice up until this week. And after this week, you're either allowed in the locker room or you're allowed to cover practice. Well, inside baseball stuff for our listeners. So the Dolphins are going to allow us in the locker room starting next week. No more practice viewing other than stretching. Teams are required to allow reporters to see stretching throughout the league during the regular season. In exchange, though, the NFL requires teams to give injury reports starting Labor Day week.
You're anxiously anticipating and waiting for those injury reports, aren't you, Barry?
Yeah, yes, we are. Because right now we're on a cloud. We're under a cloud of uncertainty with several guys, including Benito Jones, Waddle, Javon Holland, several guys who we have not seen practice for well over a week with
OBJ. When will we ever know what the OBJ injury is?
What's the body part for that? Going to be fascinating. Yeah. So the big news today was
we should play like a body part guessing game.
Yes, I think we nailed it for most. There are a few that we still haven't determined. So it's funny. The big news today actually happened far north of Dolphins camp. It happened in Minnesota. Why don't you get everyone up to speed on that?
So as we've known, courtesy of Dan Le Batard, former Miami Herald, a legend, now running his own podcast on the Uverse streaming world. Le Batard, who I believe is one of the greatest interviewers of our lifetime, finally got Tua. He's addressed it before, but he's never, and I don't think he still said names. Have you noticed that Tua in 2 years does not say Brian Flores' name ever?
It's the F word. He's not allowed to say it.
He's addressed, Dan Le Batard got him to address what the differences are playing for Mike McDaniel as opposed to Brian Flores. And Tua absolutely flamed through Flores in terms of the experiences that he lived through for 2 years being coached under Flores, how adverse the situation was, and basically called him a horrible human. And as we know, and as I think you will admit, and I've said on social media, and I truly do stand by this, Tua has a truth serum. If you ask him a question, he's going to give you an honest answer, even to his detriment. And he has not really, he's soft-stepped the issue, and he's talked about it and hinted at it. And we all have all known about it, that he had a sort of abusive relationship with Brian Flores. But he's never really addressed it until he addressed it thoroughly with Dan Le Batard and talked about how horrible the experience was. And today, Brian Flores came out, and because he's required to talk as a defensive coordinator, and it just so happened to be on today, he addressed Tua's claims that he was abused by Brian Flores or mishandled or poorly coached. And really, if you take the sentiments of it, he basically said he does not fully believe that that was the experience that Tua lived through, but he takes ownership for the fact that he did not have a good player-coach relationship with Tua and hopes to grow from it.
I thought Flores handled it a lot better today, Omar, than he actually handled Tua. I thought Flores said all the right things, said he wishes well for Tua, but more importantly to me, as you just said, he mentioned he's going to grow from it. To me, that was the money comment from Flores that I was looking for. Not that it's necessarily going to get him another head coaching job. He's probably not going to get one because owners, if they weren't scared by the lawsuit, they're going to be terrified by Tua's comments. But Flores' comment today to Minneapolis reporters, look, I'm human. Tua's comments hit me in a way that I wouldn't say was positive. I've got to use that and say, how can I grow from that? How can I be better? So I thought that was the perfect Flores response. It's amazing to me, Omar, with Flores's mishandling of people and personal relationships, how in the world was he able to maximize his rosters here for the most part? Because if you look at talent compared to results, he came close to maximizing what he had. Give him credit for that. And yet he did it while mismanaging his quarterback, while not being alert to the fact that Tua would not respond to this type of bullying. He needed a different approach. And, of course, trading Minkah Fitzpatrick unnecessarily instead of compromising. So with all of these mistakes that Flores made, how in the world was he so successful as a coach when he didn't have the best material around him? That's what's interesting to me.
I don't know what you said is fair. And here's why I don't know what you said is fair. One, let's put the Minkah situation aside. Minkah demanded a trade out. He didn't want to be part of the Dolphins organization.
Because Flores was stubborn. Because he was stubborn about how he was using. Had to be his way or the highway like it always was with Flo.
Fair, but Tua also didn't want to be part of a tanking situation. Now, in Brian Flores' defense, he was never tanking. The whole organization was tanking, but Brian Flores was never tanking. And I think he's got evidence to back that up, considering the owner allegedly offered incentives to tank. I think Brian Flores did a good job coaching the Miami Dolphins. I think he had a good relationship with the defensive players. I think offensively, he didn't have a good relationship with a lot of the young players, and not all of them, but certainly Tua fit into that category. And I think part of the reason that he failed was because he never was able to hire nor maintain a good offensive coordinator, therefore was never able to have a good offense. If you think about it, there was a certain Detroit Lions coach who joined the Dolphins, wouldn't accept an offensive coordinator role, but joined the Dolphins as an offensive guru, god, overseer in Jim Caldwell, and then abruptly left after mysteriously coming down with an injury or deciding that, hey, I don't want to work for this guy. And then you get the next year, Chan Gailey, who was convinced to coach with the Miami Dolphins, not by Brian Flores, but I hear it was from GM Chris Greer, comes here, brings his offensive staff, really leads a relatively good offense, and deals with a uncomfortable situation, and basically is like, you know what? I'm good. I don't need this in my life. I'm moving on. And then the next year we do the co-coordinator situation, which we all know was a tremendous disaster, partly because nobody wanted to coach for Brian Flores as his offensive coordinator. And I think that a lot of that was a byproduct of who Flores was as a people person. And as a journalist, we are told not to ever include ourselves in the stories. However, I can tell you from personal experience dealing with Brian Flores, not a people person. Just no. And it's a no for me. Now, I think the way that he handled people, talked to people, struggled with interpersonal relationships clearly led to his firing. And one of those relationships just so happened to be his franchise quarterback or the player
and
who
his owner
developed into. Huh?
Right, his owner as well. If he had treated the owner better, he'd probably still be employed or got along better with his general manager. Chris Greer is the easiest guy in the world to get along with. How could there be conflict with Chris Greer and anyone? You have to be a supremely difficult person to have an issue with Chris Greer. Now, I want to say, unlike you, I never had an issue with Flores. Never was particularly angry with me. We never had any confrontation. I respect the man. I think he's a good coach, but I think his biggest failing, besides not cultivating the personal relationships with his players, I think his biggest failing was not being alert to the fact that Tua simply did not respond to tough love. One of your biggest responsibilities.
That's not fair.
He should have known that.
With tough love.
How could he not have known that?
Tua's father coached him with tough love. Tua played for Nick Saban. I don't think that's fair to say Tua cannot respond to tough coaching.
Okay, so tough love isn't the word. How about demeaning and degrading? It couldn't be more evident from how Tua has described it that Flores was demeaning and degrading to him, constantly told him how bad he was. Why didn't Flores realize that this approach was not working and he needed a softer touch with him? To me, that was one of Flores' greatest failings as a coach. You treat players differently depending on what they respond to. Jimmy Johnson's always said that. And so he should have realized and gotten feedback from his coaches and from his top players that Tua was not going to give him his best and respond well to this. Tua wasn't going to hear all this criticism and say, I'll show you, and have it motivate him to be better. Instead, he was just going to go into a shell. It was going to have a negative impact on him. Why didn't Flores recognize this? This is solely his responsibility for not seeing this and for not adjusting as a head coach. And that ultimately was one of several things that cost him his job.
Bad personal relationships is what cost him his job, because I certainly don't think it was performance or coaching. He produced 2 winning records with a far inferior roster to what they have right now. I just think he's bad at personal relationships, and that's an area where he's going to have to grow if he's ever going to get an opportunity. I would like to see him get another opportunity. I do believe that he was set up to fail here. I'm sorry, when you're hired to an organization to intentionally tank, you're being set up to fail, and that's what he was hired to do. And I think he rebounded by coaching a relatively respectable team for the next 2 years, except for the fact that he just had bad relationships with everybody that was of importance in the organization. And that cost him his job. Now, I would like to see this lawsuit follow through. I would like to see it be a class action lawsuit, because I don't think it's just a Dolphins problems. I'm sorry. African-American coaches are hired to bad jobs and put in bad situations. And this is a problem in the entire NFL. And if you don't see it as a problem, you're absolutely ignoring the situations that they are being put in. And it's just not Brian Flores. And if you just look at the Brian Flores situation, exclude the fact that, yes, he was bad with people, interpersonal relationships. Exclude that fact. He coached and he won. He was basically set up to fail every single week in the first season that he was here. He actually won games, too many games, or we would have Joe Burrow. And I was on the tank for Tua plan. But let's not pretend like he was not set up to fail here. And
right. But the biggest failing in the Dolphins organization, there have been many of them over the past decade. The biggest one to me is, how in the world could Ross hire a coach without having the discussion that winning was not going to be the priority in year one, that landing a high draft pick for a franchise quarterback was the priority? Why was this not conveyed to all of the head coaching candidates? I will go to my grave wondering why this was not discussed. It was such a fundamental part of the hiring process in 2019. And for Flores to act surprised that he was asked to tank? Are you kidding me? If he was surprised, why was he surprised? Why was this not discussed? It's the most elementary part of the process of tanking, to make sure your head coach is on board before you hire the head coach. And the fact that conversation never happened blows my mind. 5 years later, Omar, blows my mind.
Can you have that discussion, though?
Yeah, you have to. Don't use the tanking word. Just say winning this season is not the priority. The priority is getting a good position in the draft to get a franchise quarterback that we can build around for 15 years. That's what you need to understand if you're a candidate for this job. You're not saying we're going to throw games. You're not saying we're going to sign Nathan Peterman or whoever. But you're making clear winning's not the priority that year. Why was that not conveyed?
He made that very clear. He was fundamentally opposed to it. And
so I don't know. So don't hire the man.
Well, we clearly see that it was a miscommunications on all levels within the organization. Now we got Mike McDaniel. Everything's great and groovy. Everybody's loved. Everybody's wonderful. Everybody has to take a day off from practice. No, I'm just kidding. No,
he's kidding. Yeah,
it's
not a picnic, as Calais Campbell said. You know what I thought was interesting? Not to digress, Omar. I just wanted to throw out this quick thing. It's interesting that Calais Campbell told us that some people around the organization thought that coming here would be easy, but that he quickly realized it was not. That even though McDaniel's a people coach, he said that it's not a picnic here. They practice hard. They just maximize in a finite, shorter period of time all of the work that needs to be done. I found that interesting. So even though McDaniel's a player's coach, people shouldn't perceive this to mean that it's a country club here as far as practicing. It's certainly not. But I digress. I'm sorry.
No, that's an excellent point. And I know Sun Sentinel columnist Chris Perkins is writing a piece about Country Club McDaniel. And I joke at times. I mean, guys work every other day. Tyreek shows up 50 minutes late for practice. if you want to work, you can, but when you do, but Tart is a great example. If you don't work when you're supposed to be working, you get shown the door. But then players like Jalen Ramsey, I'm sorry, they had to force Jalen Ramsey to sit out a week of practice. It's and I don't know if this is the right approach, but ultimately, if Mike McDaniels and the sports science team says that this is the right approach in order to get us to perform better in December and January, and they perform better in January, then they win. That's the end result, and I'm not going to evaluate it now. But could I say to you that this is probably the lightest training camp I've seen in 16 years? Absolutely. No question in my mind. I mean, guys show up for practice on the field 30, 40 minutes into practice. And I understand.
Right. In the case of Tyreek, and he's certainly entitled to, if anyone deserves it, he does. Yes, it's not nearly as grueling as it was during the Shula Tua days. Yeah. But, the league is not like that in general now. I don't think McDaniel's practices are any more lax or far more forgiving than the majority of teams. But look, as you said, they have to try a whole bunch of things to see if they can solve the December, January swoon. They haven't yet. And if they have it again, then it's on McDaniel and everybody for trying things that ultimately did not work. I understand in theory giving veterans days off rather than having to practice every day in this relentless heat and humidity. But if it doesn't work and they're 1-5 again down the stretch, which is not out of the question. Again, I don't want to be Debbie Downer. We all hope they do well, but the schedule is so difficult down the stretch and they're set up again for failure if they don't fix this December, January issue. And it's not just injuries, December, January, it's performance. Tua has to be better. Everybody has to be better in December and January, and they better fix it this year.
Yeah, but I think also the injuries factored into the late season.
Oh, without question. Without question. Right.
So to me, and I say this, the biggest concern I have about this team is that they're old and they're fragile. And anybody who challenges that, please do, because they're old and they're fragile. If you look at everybody that they've added in the offseason, injury and durability issues. Except for Calais Campbell, who's, good God, he's a pillar and pillar of consistency.
It's been older guys, but Omar, I did want to make one point. I've been critical of Greer for signing guys with a history of injuries, but I've got to give him credit for this. I wrote something about this a couple months ago. Aside from Anthony Walker, they generally avoided guys with a history of recent injuries. I know Jordan Brooks obviously had the ACL, but he was a medical marvel. He suffered it in the last game of the season. He was back for the opener the following season last year with Seattle. But generally, I thought Greer and the front office did a better job of avoiding guys with injuries. That said, obviously, you've got a left tackle who's never played a full season. Of course, he wants to. He just hasn't. His body hasn't held up. You have a quarterback, obviously, who's had only one healthy season. You had players at other positions. Obviously, as you mentioned, Calais Campbell, 37, even though he's been a medical marvel, has played. You do have to worry about health and him getting tired. You have a starting safety in Javon Holland, who has not been particularly durable the last year. You have another safety in Jordan Poyer, who's very tough, but obviously he's had several injuries getting older. Right. So there are concerns with injuries. I do think, though, Greer did a better job this offseason of not getting players who had as many injuries in their past as he had in previous years, when I thought it was a major shortcoming in the organization's thinking.
I'd have to look into it, Barry, but yeah, based on OBJ, like it's not consistent.
It's fair. It's fair, right? But
OBJ,
at $3 million, I mean, it was still a good investment. Yeah. Assuming we see OBJ at some point. Sounds like maybe next week, maybe. McDaniel.
Here's my thing about that. When you are capped out and you have all this money in your top 12 players, and then you have to sign guys for veteran minimum contracts or $2 million deals or even $3 million deals, I'm sorry, a lot of those guys are going to be dented cans. They're going to be aged. They're going to be injury prone. That's just the reality of what you're working with to build the rest of your roster. So I don't have a problem with the way the roster is constructed. If they get lucky and they don't have that many injuries and they don't lose guys, get decimated by injuries early in the season or late in the season, they should be pretty good.
And seeding obviously has a ton to do with it. Look how different it would have been if they had won the Sunday night finale last year, been a second seed, played Pittsburgh. They would have likely advanced to the second round. So if you picture the Steve Ross vision, and you and I haven't talked about his comments yet on CBS 4 on Saturday. But the Steve Ross vision that if they're healthy, they're a Super Bowl contender, my reaction is, well, maybe a fringe Super Bowl contender.
No, they
to
are.
me, there are about
They
a dozen things that have to go right. Tua obviously has to play great and be healthy. They need to be healthy. They need a pass rush.
But what's different than any other team? What's different than the Baltimore Ravens or the Buffalo Bills? These are top 10, top 12 teams in the league.
But if they have to win two road games to make it, if they have to win 2 road games to make it, is there a plausible path for them to do it if they're a wild card seed again? No, in my mind. They have to at least win the division, ideally be a 2 seed. Well, I mean, it's unlikely they're going to be a top seed.
If you face Kansas City in one of those first 2 rounds, okay, you're donezo. If you face Baltimore or Cincinnati, you can win it. You can win it.
Well, I would say unlikely to win there in Baltimore. I know they did 2 years ago, the Big Tua game, but you saw how they were dominated last year. So to me, you need to have home field at least in the first round to give yourself even a fighter's chance of making it. So in response to Ross's comments, I want your feeling on this. I think I know what it is. In response to Ross's comments about them being a Super Bowl contender, I would add the word fringe. I would say it's not out of the question where it would be the most shocking thing in the history of life if they made the Super Bowl, but I would call them a fringe Super Bowl contender. Right now, their ESPN odds are 10th shortest.
Are you not a believer, Barry?
Contender because can you even say with certainty it's a playoff team?
Name me 10 teams better than the Miami Dolphins right now, because I think you're a contender if you're one of the top 10 teams. If you can name me 10 teams that are clearly better than the Miami Dolphins, I will acknowledge that they're a fringe contender. I can't. Okay, Kansas City, Baltimore. I'm not gonna put Cincinnati, but I'll put Cincinnati. Buffalo, 49ers.
That's 5.
Are you willing to put?
Yeah, they're probably in that next group, but the top 4 to me, if we just go Baltimore, Kansas City, San Francisco, are clearly better, and Buffalo's obviously had their number. So to me, you're fringe in the sense that you're going to be a clear underdog if you face any of those teams, and you're very likely going to face at least one of those teams in the AFC. You're not going to face San Francisco, obviously, in the AFC.
But if I'm a top 10 team in this league, I should be a contender. Who's to say? Look at Baltimore. They lost Lamar Jackson in the playoffs 2 years ago. Look at Cincinnati. Hell, Joe Burrow's played less games than Tua Tagovailoa in his career. You never know where the injury gods are going to swing a team. Kansas City can lose Travis Kelce. I think that changes the complete dynamics of their team. Or they can lose Chris Jones.
I counter with this. If you say the Atlanta Falcons are around where the Dolphins are, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th team in the league, if I said to you the Falcons are a Super Bowl contender, your reaction would be what?
Absolutely not. They don't have the talent. But I would.
How are the Dolphins different when the Falcons' skill position players are very, very good? They obviously added 2 key defensive pieces with the safety and with Matthew Judon.
They don't have Tyreek Hill. Come on, Barry. Come on. They don't have the number 1 player in the game.
I'll give you a Super Bowl contender, but I'm going to use the word fringe.
Houston, I would throw Houston in the mix. If you're a top 10 team in this league, based on injuries, you are a Super Bowl contender.
But don't you have to win a playoff game before calling yourself a Super Bowl contender? No, it should be a prerequisite.
49ers made it to the Super Bowl, or they made it like maybe the NFC Championship, and then they didn't win a playoff game the year before they made the NFC Championship. You have to get lucky. You have to have the right pieces. You have to have the right trades. Christian McCaffrey trade put the 49ers drastically up there. I think this foundation of this team, healthy, the foundation of this team, Teron Armstead, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Jonnu Smith, defensively, Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell, David Long, Jordan Brooks, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Ramsey. What unit doesn't have a top tier player at their position? If they stay healthy, if they stay healthy, they'll be right up there. Now, do I have confidence that they'll stay healthy? No, but then I never know what any other team. What's Baltimore going to go through health wise? What's Cincinnati going to go through health-wise? Who knows if Buffalo just absolutely falls off the face of the map? Like, they stripped Josh Allen of all his weapons, well, except for a tight end. Okay, can they be the tight end and running back driven league? We don't know until the season begins and how teams respond to adversity and how teams respond to injury. I dismiss your fringe Super Bowl team. They are a top 10 team. You can't name 10 better. Let them talk their Super Bowl till injury.
Okay, my response to that is this. You were a 6th seed last year. Obviously, you were 1 game away from being a 2nd seed. I get that. You were 6th seed last year. You've lost 3 blue chip players with Wilkins, Connor Williams, Rob Hunt. Are you just going to give that short shrift and say it doesn't matter? They're still just as good as a year ago. I don't think they're as good as a year ago. I got more blue chip players. I added more blue chip players. They might be as good as a year ago if they're fully healthy once Phillips, obviously, who's back, once Chubb is back as well. I see a good team, Omar, but I don't know how you can call them a Super Bowl contender or a serious Super Bowl contender, because I call them a fringe Super Bowl contender. I don't think you can call them a serious Super Bowl contender until we see them go in to Cincinnati, go into Buffalo, go into Kansas City, win a game, be better in December, maybe even win a playoff game. To me, these are necessary steps to call your team a serious Super Bowl contender. So I think it's a good team. I think they are a fringe, air quotes, Super Bowl contender. But to say a serious Super Bowl contender to me feels like a little bit of a stretch. Everything would have to go right. There are like 12 things that would have to go right for them to win. For the Buffalo Bills. It's a much shorter list of things that have to go right.
Oh, absolutely. Same for the Buffalo Bills. Same for Cincinnati Bengals. Same for the Baltimore Ravens. They got they need a lot of things to go right. Yes. Dolphins, probably 8 things have to go right, not 12. Let's not exaggerate, Barry. Eight things would have to go right.
I'll go with 8.
Teron Armstead plays a whole season. Oh, you're going to the Super Bowl. In my opinion, as long as you don't, decimate every other. They're a different team with a healthy Teron Armstead. They can.
But the Dolphins, see, one thing that I know we can't quantify. It's intangible. Does Dolphins karma concern you? Everything that can go wrong typically does go wrong. I know people joke about the quest to search, but there's always something. Yeah. Does that not concern you?
Obviously it does. I know they're going to be decimated by injuries by the time we get to midseason. But I'm a glass half empty guy. I admit that. I can't. Well, you can't.
No way to go through life being glass half empty. And I don't want our listeners to think I'm Debbie Downer, Mr. Negative. I think they have a good team. They have their best product in years. Although I think last year's team might be a little better depending on what they get from Odell and Jonnu Smith and Jordan Brooks and Aaron.
Last year's team might be a little better.
Last year's team, if healthy, with a healthy Phillips, a healthy Chubb, a healthy Connor Williams, was better, because I don't so easily dismiss the loss of Wilkins, Connor Williams, and Rob Hunt and say, yeah, no problem at all. And I know Hunt missed a bunch of games last year, but he was a top flight guard. Someone paid the man $100 million. I know it's not all guaranteed. Someone paid the man $100 million. Wilkins, with his productivity, his durability at the anchor of that team, that to me, you can't underestimate, even though we both love Calais Campbell. We adore the man. We respect him. He's going to be a terrific player here, but you can't give that short shrift. So no, I'm not convinced they're as good as the team that was a 6th seed.
They are better in other areas, Barry. I can't believe we're having this argument. They are better at running back. They're deeper at running back. They are better at tight end.
Much better at tight end. I'll give you that.
Much better at tight end. If Odell Beckham is healthy, they're better at wide receiver. And goodness gracious, come on, it wasn't hard to get better at wide receiver considering – we were Cedric Wilson in it. Look at offensive line. Hands down, I give it to you. They're not as good as they were last year. That's a problem. That's an issue. Hopefully, Chris Greer will address that waiver wire, trade deadline, something. Defensive line,
no, not as good. No, don't try to convince me it's as good as the group that lost Wilkins.
No, it's not.
I would say there's no unit defensively they're better than last year. You could make a case
inside linebacker.
Linebacker, I could say I'm not ready to say that Jordan Brooks is appreciably better than Jerome Baker. Maybe he's a little better. We have to see. I'm not selling Jerome Baker short either. He was a productive player. No, he wasn't great, but he was a productive player. Edge rusher, not better, because they don't have Chubb to start the season. Phillips is coming off an injury. We're not sure what they're going to get from Chop.
Hey, Chop Robinson might have 10 sacks this season.
Not better at corner. not better at corner, even though we both like Kendall Fuller. He's a stand-up guy. He's been a solid corner in the league. But what Xavier gave them last year when he was healthy was every bit as good as what they can realistically expect from Kendall Fuller. So they are not better at cornerback. Safety, I guess Brandon Jones, that combination with Deshaun Elliott compared to Jordan Poyer, if this were 2019,
Marcus May has contributed. Marcus May has been far superior than everybody they lost last year, and he's the backup.
Okay, so Poyer and May compared to Elliott and Jones, yes. If both players are healthy, that should be better. Okay, so I'll give you safety. They're better at safety. They're not better any other unit defensively.
Inside linebacker. Come on, Barry. You can't give me inside linebacker?
I guess if Anthony Walker were healthy, they'd be deeper with Walker and Riley as their 3 and 4 instead of Riley as their 3, Tyndall as their 4. But Walker just hasn't been healthy for 3 weeks. Jordan Brooks, I think, is at least as good as Jerome Baker. Whether he's much better, we have to see with our eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but again, I must say, I'm not down on the team. To me, it's a playoff team. They're a 10-win team. They're a nice team. They're a fun team. You know, they're probably a wild card team with a chance to win the division. But Super Bowl contender, to me, you reserve that to the proven best of the best. Kansas City, Baltimore, San Francisco. The Bills, I know, haven't made it, but they've won the division for 4 straight years. They've consistently dominated Miami.
And those are the
How can
only
you put Miami at that level
name
without seeing evidence?
Those are the only teams you can name, Barry, that are clearly better than Miami. The only teams. Houston, okay. I would say I might put them in the conversation. But so if there are 6 teams that might be better than me, how am I not a Super Bowl contender?
Does the Bengals making a Super Bowl not matter to you? Or are we just going to ignore that?
I don't believe in the Bengals. I don't. They lost their starting running back. Hell, their top wide receiver is still not even practicing. He might be a season holdout. He hasn't practiced 1 day in training camp, Barry. Like Joe Burrow, can he stay healthy? Have the Bengals fixed their offensive line issues? Like, I don't know. It's season has to play out. I'm not willing to say the Cincinnati Bengals are head and shoulders better than the Miami Dolphins. I'm not willing to say the Houston Texans are head and shoulders better than the Miami Dolphins. And I don't think there's anybody else in the AFC I'm even worried. What am I worried about? Pittsburgh? Indianapolis?
How about the stinking Jets? How about the New York Jets? We haven't mentioned them. It's funny, there was a poll on one of the ESPN shows, I think it was Get Up this week, where several former players said the Jets should be favored over Miami to win the division. As much as Rodgers can be distasteful to everyone with his know-it-all attitude, how can we discount them so quickly? Are we convinced the Dolphins have a better roster than the Jets? Are we convinced?
No, and I've said this, and Dolphin fans get upset at it. If Aaron Rodgers gives you another MVP caliber season, you're in trouble. You're absolutely in trouble.
Then you might be third best team in the division.
Yeah. So, I mean, we shall see. But then who's to say Tua can't take a next step and become an upper echelon quarterback better than he already is? We don't know. We don't know. Who's to say Odell Beckham doesn't show up in 3 weeks and it looks like Odell Beckham from 5 years ago? We don't know.
Right.
But like we got to play it. Jalen Wright could be like the best back in the league, just like Devon Achane set an NFL record. Who would have thought Devon Achane would be the NFL all-time leading yards per carry average guy based on what we saw in training camp? Nobody. Absolutely nobody. We just don't know. You got to let it play out. I do like the talent on the team. More importantly, I like the leadership on the team. And the one thing that I've noticed about this team that is a player-led team, player-driven team. I've never seen that in my tenure with the Dolphins. Maybe I've seen it like once before. And I think that truly does make a difference. The players call the shots around here. And that's not a bad thing. People might look at that as like, oh my God, how dare you? Mike McDaniel's their leader. No, Mike is actually taking a backseat to the leaders on the team, and the leaders set the standards. The leaders are calling each other out. The leaders are holding each other accountable. Mike just coaches them. And I think that, and from what I'm told, that's what happens with elite teams. It's the players who set the standard. So we shall see where it goes from here. One thing I wanted to address with you, Barry, is Mike McDaniel's ridiculous comments and conversation about the adverse situation that he's put his quarterbacks in this training camp just to test them and see, hey, I'm going to throw the most adverse situation at you I could possibly can to see how you handle it. Are you buying that for the number 2 job, Barry?
Well, I mean, it's not like we've seen coals and fire thrown on the field where Mike White has to run through it barefoot. So I think it sort of stretches what's actually happening. One thing we have seen is that the number 2 snaps are consistently going to one guy whose name rhymes with Byler. We can't say who it is. But anyway, which is unusual. And I asked Mike about that last week, and he said, this is a change. They would traditionally rotate who gets the number 2 snaps. They haven't done that. Skylar Thompson, from all of the Dolphins' actions, is a number 2 quarterback. That's not saying that he's definitely going to win the job, because he could easily screw it up. But the Dolphins are giving Skylar Thompson every possible chance to win this job. And Mike White, I mean, poor Mike White, he's probably going to be poor if he's cut, loses the $3.5 million. But poor Mike White has to sit there playing with guys off the street, right? It's just, it's been very bizarre to see
a wide receiver, running back, an offensive lineman who's never snapped in a game.
Yeah, if Skylar is absolutely great on Friday, he's cheaper, and all of their actions suggest they're ready to go with Skylar Thompson. But if Skylar stinks up the joint, which is not unrealistic, it could happen, then I think Mike White, is probably still in pretty good position. But what an odd way this has unfolded, where everyone with eyes can see that they're giving Skylar all the opportunities at number 2. He was the first quarterback to enter first 2 preseason games. The Dolphins, though, won't acknowledge it publicly. It's like the kid with 4 arms that they just can't talk about publicly. It's just been all very odd to me.
It's a very interesting dynamic. We've watched this and talked about it since day one. I have been very on the record where I have not liked anything I've seen from any of the backup quarterbacks. And this isn't just training camp. This is OTAs. So I can understand what they're doing. The question is, does Mike White understand it? And he addressed it today during our interviews.
The joint practice and then the preseason game, how important they are for the quarterback line, backup quarterback line.
It's every practice is important. And I know it sounds super cliche, quarterback talk, but that's what I've learned throughout my time in the league is it's never just one thing, it's a collection of things. So if you start thinking one practice is more important than the other, or 1 week is more important than the other, you start to get out of your mental state and you start to worry about the wrong things, and then it starts to show up on the field. So no, I'm going to approach this thing the same way I've approached it from day one out here before we even got to joint. So I'm just going to do my job, go through my reads, do my footwork, all that good stuff that we talk about, and just play ball.
How difficult is it when you don't have a set unit or set group to sort of get that proper evaluation?
Such is life as a backup quarterback. I mean, you don't get to control when you go in. You don't get to control who's in there. You don't get to control how many reps you got prior. It's just it's the nature of the beast, and we all know what we sign up for. So, yeah, I think this is a cool way of trying their best to replicate it. So you just got to kind of roll with the punches, and there's going to be ebbs and flows, and you gotta get your guys right and be that calming presence in the huddle, because when a huddle can feel when a quarterback is stressed out or tense, then they start to panic, and then they don't get to do their jobs, and then you're starting to affect their livelihood and their family. So that's kind of how I look at it. Is I want to put these guys in the best possible position to make, if not this team, some other team or whatever. It's a crazy league. We never know what's going to happen. So that's just kind of how I've wanted to approach it. And maybe in my younger years I'd be stressing out or all that good stuff, but I've been trying to keep a level head and just have fun with it.
So what it's been solid in that regard that you're talking about, like getting into a huddle as a backup. I know your days with the Jets.
Right.
What's kind of the approach, the mindset you need to take into those situations?
Yeah, I think experience helps. Having a couple starts under my belt and having been thrusted into a game that you didn't really think you were going to. So, yeah, experience helps a lot. So I just try to be, like I said, like calm them down, maybe crack a joke a time or two, or like just try to get these guys to just relax. And especially when you're with young guys, like there's so much anxiety, so much, I got to make a play, I got to do my job. If I don't do my job, the coaches are going to get on me. Like, so you try to eliminate that to the best of your ability for them, just to let them go out there and just play. I mean, obviously the guys are more talented at this level, but at the end of the day, it's just football. I mean, that's what I try to communicate to them and try to convey, and hopefully it calms them down and lets them just play their game.
Yeah, tough situation for Mike White. I'm going to make an early prediction, Barry, and I'm going to tell you that he's going to start this game, and we're going to watch against Tampa, and then we're going to watch Skylar play with the scrap unit and try to figure it out and play Skylar ball. We know Skylar is good at that. I think they were trying to test whether Skylar could be a traditional quarterback. I don't know.
Set up in the pocket consistently. He's allergic to setting up in the pocket. I don't know why.
Don't do that. He's got happy feet a little bit. He moves out the pocket, but maybe you could build a rollout offense for him. You could build a play action offense for him. I'm not necessarily certain you could do that with Mike White, but either way this goes, they could very well keep 2 quarterbacks on the 53, at least early, and then try to put one on the practice squad later on in the year. I suspect Mike White might be getting the shakedown, as we've seen it before, Barry. You do the business of the league. When some team can trim your payroll by $2 million, they will trim your payroll by $2 million. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Let's talk about some of the other positions, Barry. Even though they cut Savon Ahmed, want to pour out a little liquor for Savon. Thought it was a little bit unfair. He didn't even get to practice play in the preseason game. They added 2 running backs. Chris Brooks is battling that concussion. Obviously, he can't play in the game with concussion-like symptoms. Do you think he makes the 53, Barry?
I do. I think, as I've consistently told you, Omar, this is a talent you invest in. We've seen the hard running. We saw the 59-yard run before the injury. If he's not concussed next week, I keep him. Even if he is concussed, I consider keeping him. Maybe IR him. The issue is with IR is this, just to remind our listeners, this year you are allowed to put 2 players on IR after or the same time you set the 53, where they don't have to be on your initial 53, and you can bring them back. So you can do that with 2 guys. You have a total of 8 slots to bring back guys who are on IR at some point this year, but only 2 do you get that get out of jail card where you can put them on IR next Tuesday, but not have them on your initial 53 and can get them back after 4 weeks. Craycraft will probably be one. The question is, will Chris Brooks be the other, or will there be some other person that they stash on IR, don't have to put on the 53, but can bring back if they want after 4 games? But yes, I think Brooks likely makes it, but that's just more me instinct rather than reporting.
Yeah, another guy that I think is a good chance that he's going to make it, especially based on how he's played in the last 2 preseason games, Channing Tindall, Barry. Tindall might make it on the 53-man roster, and I thought that he was a dead man walking before we began actually playing games that mattered. He talked today, and basically is, he's not going to lose confidence in himself. He says the system's a little bit better for him. Yes, you've made some plays, but I think the instincts is just not there. But I think he probably makes his team on special teams. The one position that I am a little bit concerned about in terms of the 53-man roster, as we presently see it, is wide receiver. There's a ton of injuries to the point. Last week we were talking about Eric Uzukama not making the 53-man roster. Today he might be the number 3 receiver just because of all the injuries that are on this team. How do you see that battle playing out this week in Wednesday's joint practice with Tampa, which we'll be there to cover, and then Friday night's exhibition game?
I think he's on the team. I'd be shocked if Ezekam is not. I think Malik Washington is on the team. And if Odell is back and healthy by the opener, and assuming Waddle is as well, with what McDaniel has called minor, then it's a clear-cut room of Tyreek, Waddle, Odell Beckham, Braxton Berrios, Eric Ezekama, Malik Washington. No questions asked. Those are your 6. But if Odell is not ready for the opener, then I think you might have to consider signing a veteran to your practice squad. You don't sign him to your 53 because you don't want him to be vested and have to pay the whole year's salary. So you sign him to your practice squad and you promote him for week 1. The question is, it's a complex offense to learn. Is there anyone that's going to be floating out on the street that you could trust to play snaps against Jacksonville if Odell Beckham is not ready? The only other person I could see cracking this would be Braylon Sanders, but he has an injury that could keep him sidelined for the next couple of weeks, so he looks more practice squad to me. But do you need a veteran receiver added to this mix if Odell's not ready for the opener?
No, I don't think. I think it'd take a veteran receiver too long to learn the offense. Maybe a guy who can be a returner. I'm ready to ride with Anthony Schwartz, who came back to practice today. Anthony Schwartz and Braylon Sanders, and Braylon's injured. I haven't seen anybody who can beat them out for practice squad spot. But then again, Barry, hey, why don't I claim a guy? You never know what you're going to get on the waiver wire. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Oh man, on the 27th. how the Dolphins put together that 53-man roster is going to be so interesting. And Dolphins in Depth, Miami Herald podcast, we will be there to cover it all. We will see you tomorrow for joint practices with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On that note, you're out.